Welcome to the Healthiest Tech Talks, where we're talking about some of the biggest challenges facing healthcare organizations today and how technology can transform the way we work so that patients receive better care. I'm your host, Natalie Tollefson, Senior Director of Customer Success at Optimum Healthcare IT. Let's dive in. All right. Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of Healthiest Tech in 2025. Today, we are diving into one of the most pressing issues in healthcare IT, AI security and risk. And I think all of us know that AI is transforming how hospitals and health systems operate. But with that transformation comes hidden dangers, such as security gaps, compliance failures, and operational risks that could cost health systems millions. And so with the record pace that AI adoption is taking and hospitals and health systems are being expected to keep up, CIOs and CISOs really need to be asking a few pressing questions. Are we secure? Are we compliant? And are we ready for the risks that AI brings? So today, I'm really excited to welcome two special guests. First, we have Jonathan Keith Banks. Jonathan is a cybersecurity and healthcare technology leader who has served as the CIO and CISO for many leading healthcare organizations. And Jonathan heads up Optimum's security practice, where he is often called upon to drive rapid transformation in security programs after a significant security event. So his expertise spans cybersecurity, risk management, regulatory compliance, and disaster recovery. Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And Jonathan, we like to always ask our speakers to share just a quick personal fun fact. So what is yours today?
Yeah, so something not a lot of people know about me. I do have or have had a little bit of a fear of big dogs. That was until about a year ago. I found a stray, about 8-week-old puppy that I was going to nurse to health and find someone to take her. And I have fallen in love with this dog and actually had some genetic testing done. And it turns out she's about 10% of a little bit of everything, all the breeds I said I would never have. But she is the sweetest dog and kind of wrestles with me for my spot on the couch now, but absolutely love this dog.
Great. You know, your compassion for animals has overshadowed your fear of them. So that says a lot about your character. So thanks for sharing. And then we also have Nicholas Friedman, who is a thought leader in AI governance, information security, and risk management, and CEO of Templar Shield, which is an elite ServiceNow partner that specializes in integrated risk management, cybersecurity, and compliance. Optimum Healthcare IT and Templar Shield actually partner on a regular basis to provide healthcare specific expertise on all things risk and security. So we are very thankful to work and collaborate with Nick and his team. Nick, thank you for joining us. What is your fun fact?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. You know, being in IT and being that we're working in tech so heavily, I like to get out in nature as much as possible. And I actually go hunting every year for elk and deer as I live in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And it's really interesting, kind of fun fact and comparable to AI is oftentimes when I'm out hiking through thousands of acres of public land and I'm stalking an elk or deer, this last season, I was actually being hunted as well, right? And hunting alongside and against wolves as they've been reintroduced to Colorado, came face to face with a very large gray wolf about 50 feet away. And luckily she was by herself and got spooked and ran away. And then a little bit later in the week, came pretty close with 2 mountain lions that were also hunting for the same elk I was after, right? So a lot of times we're both the predator and the prey at the same time. And I find it very relevant with AI. Sometimes there are these light chatbots that we're using, and then we all see the big risks, right? The existential components that are being published in the news. So very relevant, but at the same time, you have to be comfortable hunting and potentially being hunted in these kind of environments.
Wow. Well, that might be the best AI analogy that I've ever heard. So thank you. That's really so interesting, and the irony is really humbling, to say the least. Well, great. I'm so excited you guys are with us. I think our audience is going to really benefit from the depth of experience and insight that both of you offer around this topic. So Jonathan, you spend a lot of time talking with healthcare CIOs and CISOs about AI, not just AI, but all the risks and the dangers that lurk behind it. Can you just kick us off by painting a picture of what the biggest pressures are that IT leaders are feeling around this, and how do you manage those conflicting priorities, right, when it comes to the opportunity that AI offers healthcare, right, but then also the risks that come with it?
Yeah. So a lot of my time is spent embedded in healthcare organizations as their interim CISO or virtual CISO. And so over the last couple of years, I've been kind of working in that role as AI has suddenly kind of come on the scene and exploded. And we started talking about putting policies in place. And since I probably knew a little bit more about AI than my other peers, often it was kind of looked to me to help guide and put that in place. But it was certainly kind of a learning on the job experience, and we have seen kind of rapid adoption in healthcare, especially in some areas like radiation oncology and transcription. Some of the things that kind of we've learned the hard way is that many times the language in the contracts it was ambiguous as far as what was going to happen with our data. And so, that was one thing that I needed to pull in my peers from legal and privacy and other areas. The demand, suddenly hit. We're from folks from our innovation team were working with various groups to bring AI in when we didn't kind of fully yet understand the risk. And I have been in preparing for this talk, calling some of my peers that I've worked with at other organizations and trying to ask them kind of where they're at. And many of them are still working on their AI policy and building their governance processes. I know a lot of them said when kind of Microsoft came out with Copilot that one of the things that they were struggling with is who gets a license, because they weren't prepared for the $20 per person per year subscription, and even understanding where there's the cost benefit for that. But we especially in healthcare and us being regulated by the Department of Health and Human Services, their expectation is that anything we're putting our healthcare data into, that we have fully vetted the risk. And we're just now starting to really kind of understand the risk. And there's various studies around adoption of AI in healthcare. I can tell you that whether or not you know it, people in your organization are using AI, and there's a big issue with shadow AI out there with employees using their own web-based tools, and most of the time organizations don't really have a good inventory of what's being used out there.
Right. Actually, I'm glad you brought that topic up, shadow AI, because I have a stat here from Journal BMJ Health and Care Informatics that says, as of 2024, 1 in 5 general practitioners reported using AI tools like ChatGPT in their clinical practice for daily tasks, whether it's generating documentation after a patient visit or suggesting alternative diagnoses. And that just really took me back. That is quite alarming to me. And so, Nick, I'm curious to hear from you what you see as the major risks with this concept of shadow AI. Not a concept, it's really a reality that's happening everywhere. But uncontrolled AI use. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, there's two examples come to mind. And the one that everyone talks about is, the same way this was shadow IT, as Jonathan was talking about. Like, are people using freemium versions of AI? And so, the in this particular component, there's a few different ways. There's the ones that everyone's aware of, right? The companies are rolling out Copilot with Microsoft, etc. But the other ones, if people are using ChatGPT, that's the one that's on everyone's mind right now. Are we taking any patient data, company data, using freemium versions and versus pro versions where you have more control of a lot of that data from a contractual perspective? And so those are the big ones. But there's a lot of small opportunities too. We're seeing a lot of these AI note takers that people are just adding on to Zoom meetings, right? And we have a policy, and we add in as a text in all of our meetings, please ensure you're using a company approved AI note taker like Microsoft Copilot or Google Solutions if you're either a Microsoft or Google shop. But a lot of people we talk to are just, oh, but I got this for free. And as the saying goes, if you're using a freemium software, you're the product. Your data is the product. And so where are those notes being stored? Right? Who has access to those? What are the encryption components? Have there been risk assessments in these AI note takers? How accurate are they? A lot of people haven't done those risk assessments. And so those are ways that data is leaking out of organizations. And so that's what a lot of people talk about. I think it's a very important fact. Another thing I like to bring up in this is recently I went and got a head to toe advanced MRI scan for my entire body, all my organs, everything, to detect potential tumors, cancers, etc. Because AI is out there now that can do some really great things in early detection. And had the file sent to my doctor's office. And this was an example of me, right, a consumer or a patient using unapproved technology and then taking it to my doctor. So my doctor's like, I've never seen anything like this, right? He's like, we're finding little tiny things that are as small as 1 millimeter on this. And our current technology that we have in hospitals can't detect anything under 5 millimeters. And so I'm thinking, well, what advice do you have for me here? He's like, there's no standard here of care except monitoring, right? But then he gets all that data and uploads it into a system, right? So was that assessed? Did they do any risk assessments against the data packets that were being stored in there? So there's an interesting way that sometimes healthcare companies are not approving these advanced detection tools as of yet. And so consumers and patients like myself are bringing this data in. And the question is, is that data even compliant to be stored in those systems? What about the vendor I went to get scanned? Are they HIPAA compliant? Have they had to go through any compliance or risk assessment processes? And it's a big question mark out there right now.
Well, and I can imagine that a healthcare professional who's really just focused on the patient care aspect is not necessarily going to be automatically thinking about these things, right? They're just wanting to do their jobs and deliver great care to their patients. So that's a great example. And Jonathan, given that you are talking with healthcare organization and their leaders day in and day out, I mean, what examples could you share about healthcare organizations that, maybe had an event or have seen some of the impact of the risk of AI or uncontrolled use of AI?
Right. So a lot of the organizations that I've worked with are academic health systems where there is some research component going on, and researchers are very excited about these AI tools. And again, we're in many cases still kind of catching up with the governance processes, with doing kind of proper risk assessments. But I have seen where researchers have taken kind of data models, data on actual patients, and pasted it into an AI engine to do some research, and not really kind of realizing what the terms of service are, whether or not that data is going to persist. And there's a requirement that if we're going to put patient data into a system like this, that we've got a business associate agreement in place with that vendor and a documented risk assessment. And that is something that the Office for Civil Rights, who enforces HIPAA, has been coming down on organizations very harshly about. So absolutely, there's the need to have good policy that's well educated, kind of proper controls and risk assessment in place in this area. And even with the tools that you're bringing in, to make sure that you're doing an extensive review of the contracts. With some of the contracts that I've reviewed, even if we terminated our relationship with the organization, their default language was that they were going to keep the data indefinitely for training their model. And it's like, no, we need to make sure that our patient data is returned or destroyed if that situation were to occur.
Wow. Well, the devil's really in the details, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, that's really profound. And I think, just to kind of recap, the problem is real. I mean, shadow AI, uncontrolled use of AI, just the ease with which clinicians and others can use it and can share data that does not have proper controls around it. It's definitely a big problem today. And so for those listening, as IT and security leaders, what we really want to be able to deliver to you today are, what are those three big questions that every CIO and CISO should be asking as it relates to AI? And what guidance can we provide you to help you get a better handle on that and help protect your organization and your patients? So the first one, let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first question that you should be asking is, do you have a clear picture of where AI is being used by employees across your organization? And what data do those tools have access to? So Jonathan, I'm going to come back to you here, and you've already spoken to this a bit, but what else can you provide to kind of support why this is such an important question to be asking?
Yeah, in talking with my peers the last couple of weeks, the consensus is that yes, some of them are blocking ChatGPT, but they are not blocking the other LLMs that are out there. And we know that employees are using those. We know that in some cases there's not the right education on which tools are allowed to be used, and even for the approved tools, what data sets are allowed to go into these tools. And the there's a lot kind of happening and evolving on the research side very quickly with this.
So Nick, what does it look like for an IT leader or security leader to run an audit around this, to really understand what is being used?
Yeah, three things that they need to be asking themselves, right? As Jonathan was mentioning there, um, not only shadow use of AI, but when you're monitoring for planned use, are in healthcare, are your employees going as far as getting consent, right? I'll talk about three things. One, incidents, tools you can use, and why you're using those tools. And so incidents, we go back as far as 2019. Google had a project called Nightingale that they worked with Ascension on, aimed at developing more of these AI powered healthcare analytics. So they uploaded millions and millions of patient data, right? And what they clearly missed on that was lack of patient consent, right? Not from the doctors or the patients. They're rushing forward. We think we can provide a lot of value. And they knew what they were doing, and it wasn't employees using shadow AI. They were working on enterprise agreements, but technologists are not healthcare professionals, and technologists tend to not be compliance experts. This is why you need stakeholder engagement across a lot of different entities. You need compliance, you need risk, security, ethics, right? Executive leadership support in these things so that everyone has a voice, because quickly it can turn into can we versus should we, or how should we. And so when you're seeing some of these things that are out there, right, there's real risk into them. And so some tools that people can be using out there, I'll give you an example of what we do. Uh, we use a platform called Open Web UI on hosted virtual servers, and we lock this down extremely tight. And what we do is we can get access to all the AI solutions via their API. We can bring in Grok, you can bring in Google Gemini, you can bring in ChatGPT, different, and you can select which models you want to approve your team using. You can get model scorecards, their risk assessments, and how they're rating risk and compliance within the providers of the models. And then you can choose which models to use and approve your organization into a choke point, right? Into a very efficient funnel. But again, to Jonathan's point, some people are just blocking using solutions like CASB solutions around AI activity and shadow IT detection. And those tools are really good at monitoring unauthorized usage, tracking API calls, browser activity, and data movements. Some of the other things people normally are using that they can apply to AI management is network traffic analysis tools, or NTA workload detection tools, right? And they analyze and detect any suspicious AI model usage, because AI usage is very resource and energy intensive and data intensive. There's traditional endpoint detection tools that can detect AI-based threats, seeing unauthorized access. And then, of course, as people eventually get in, or these tools get in, are even being implemented, data loss prevention tools, right? So you need to be able to use those tools to monitor the usage, but also when you talk about the models themselves, we need to make sure we're getting model cards from these vendors so we can understand some of the core tenets around AI risks, which are, very high level alignment, ensuring that it's using the proper amount of resources to consume specific data sets for healthcare analysis to model those. And there's a lot of ways to do that, right? There's process-based models, not tools, but like human in the loop, called HITL. There's RLHF, which is more reinforcement learning through human feedback, which is most critical, in my opinion, in healthcare, so that these doctors and data scientists and these AI tools are working together. And so as you're using that and approving these use cases, all in all, to encompass all of this in a simple response, is tracking every AI use case. So vendor or internal employee request to use AI, assessments of the models they want to use, why they're using it, what's the intended use, what's the intended output. And if you track all of that and map those two controls to satisfy the policies that Jonathan was talking about that are being implemented now, you should be able to get your arms around how your teams want to use AI through a traditional process, and then monitor to make sure that's not happening anyway outside of those policy constraints.
So, Jonathan, based on your exposure within the healthcare industry, do you feel like there's adoption of tools like this?
Not yet. There are, my peers who are, talking about that at this point, but at least the survey that I did over the past week, uh, it's, like I said, some are blocking some of the large language models, but most of those that I talk to are not regularly looking at this point to see what's in use. and I do think that over the next year, a lot of the vendor tools will be evolving to assist with identifying where uh, AI is being used, and to kind of help give us better reporting.
Mhm.
But the uh, one of the most basic things that people can be doing right now is looking at their web content filter, and understanding what sites people are going to, and blocking those, or creating groups for those people who are authorized. Um, but that's not happening necessarily widespread. There are a few exceptions to that. Some organizations that are a little ahead of the curve on this, but I would kind of urge anybody listening out there that's working for a healthcare organization. We all need to pick up the pace on this, because from a regulatory standpoint, if you don't have your ducks in a row, the OCR has been punitive when it comes to this area.
Mm. Lots of opportunity there.
Mhm.
And speaking of regulatory, that actually brings us to the next question that all CIOs and CISOs should be asking themselves, which is, do you have a good understanding of AI compliance? And do you feel confident in your policies and procedures? Jonathan, I know this is an area that you work closely with leaders on. So what is your take on how well healthcare leaders today understand those regulations and those compliance requirements?
Right. And I'll go back to something Nick mentioned, and that I have seen uh, a lot of adoption in healthcare of uh, medical transcription, which has moved from people in call centers who are taking physician recordings and transcribing them, to now that has moved to AI doing the transcription. And there's a requirement on certain things to get a patient's approval or acknowledgement, and in some cases, organizations kind of are on top of this, and having the forms, getting the acknowledgement, uh, giving patients the ability to opt out if they don't want their data going into this cloud. Uh, but in some cases, organizations didn't uh, necessarily have a plan B. Okay, what if somebody uh, does not fill out the acknowledgement, um, but and it came down to whether or not the patient wanted that session to be recorded
Mhm.
or not, and their right to have that not be recorded. And uh, a lot of it comes down to there's a need to educate patients as well on how AI works, what is happening with their data, what's the level of security around this, and helping people to get comfortable with this, because uh, this is not just the future. This is now. We're going to see more and more of it, and healthcare as it's practiced today is very technology dependent. Um, but going back to, again, to something that I mentioned earlier, uh, uh, doing proper risk assessments, and using the framework for kind of analyzing your applications that you should already have in place, and your architecture review board. um, all of these AI based applications should be going through those same review boards, with someone on that architecture review board who understands AI and the risk around it.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, going through that governance process and then establishing policies to manage all of that, I'm sure that there's got to be a challenge with how do we make sure that those policies and procedures are, rigorous enough to make sure that there's compliance, but then also flexible, not flexible, but agile enough to keep up with how quickly AI is evolving and how quickly and easily organizations can access those types of technologies. So Nick, I'm curious from your perspective, what advice would you give to an IT leader who is trying to put these policies together?
I like to work backwards from regulations, and come to a policy component, right? So when you have policy life cycle, policy acknowledgements, you don't test policies, you test controls, right? People follow those controls, and obviously you audit those controls, and you can identify your percentage of compliance within a particular specific framework. And so where do people start? I think right now the NIST AI RMF risk management framework is front and center for everyone in North America. And then you've got the EU AI Act, right? You can crosswalk these two to look at controls. I'll give you an example. In a lot of healthcare organizations or hospitals, you go in and you can check in with your palm or facial recognition, right? And in the US, you can store facial recognition files. In the EU, you cannot store them. You can use them to identify a patient, but you cannot store that data. So a very similar process with mirror technology, two different frameworks, two of the leading frameworks. One, you can store that data with NIST that's compliant, NIST AI RMF, but with EU AI Act, you'd be non-compliant. So if you start with those two and you crosswalk those and go with the least or the most restrictive control in that, that's really where you're going to start. And NIST AI RMF really focuses on 4 areas, right? Governance, mapping, measuring, and managing. And you can break this framework down into a few different internal frameworks. There's a current way to assess where you're at in your AI adoption model. It's called the AI governance maturity model. There's a way to have automated monitoring compliance. It's AMAC, AI automated monitoring compliance. There's AI processes as you deploy these solutions called AI Gov. You need data governance structures to this model as well, right? If we look just fundamentally how IRM or GRC programs can help, there's an acronym I grew up within, and I learned it early on in my career called PERC, right? Policies, entities, risks, and controls. And so if you focus on how you're drafting policies, how you're mapping those to entities, and entities is anything a people, process, technology, AI model, and then the risks associated with those and the controls, then you should be able to have an automated model to track where you're at in this process. And so using ServiceNow as an example, they have an AI governance pack, AI Plus, that has the top 20 leading AI frameworks on the store. That easy button is just download it, install it in your IRM solution. And the ServiceNow, and as an example, and some of these other GRC platforms out there will start to show you what percentage are you compliant with NIST AI, what percentage are you compliant with EU AI Act. There's even an AI Bill of Rights being proposed right now in the U.S. Government of Science and Technology Department. So starting with those two and then expanding from there is a really good way to start the program with policy lifecycle management and control mapping. And then I'd automate that program to truly get visibility across an enterprise.
Wow, I love how you really broke that down to make it very practical and very methodical, working backwards from those 2 leading, compliance frameworks that exist, and then kind of backing into how to craft your AI policy. So thanks for sharing that. I'm guessing that several people are probably going to want to rewind and take some notes on that one. So wonderful. Okay, well, let's hit our third major question. What safeguards can you put in place to monitor AI risks so that you can respond quickly? And I know earlier we talked about some of the auditing tools. So maybe Nick, just expand on that, right? What additional safeguards could you put in place to monitor those risks so that an organization is prepared to respond swiftly and effectively?
Yeah, in those more focused frameworks, right? We talked about PERC, we talked about AI Gov, AMAC, AI Governance Maturity Model. When you look at AI entity structures and making sure you're tracking not only the AI use cases, but tracking the models you're using and approving for those use cases, and you're even tracking the prompts, right? Approved prompt tracking and inventories are critical. If you're even in just the US, if you're from New York or you're from the South or you're from California or Texas, you may type different prompts differently and may get different responses. So having an approved inventory of prompts, models, vendors, and use cases, I think is going to be critical. As Jonathan talked about, there's AI specific risk frameworks, right? The way you look at risk assessments is not going to be the same with AI models because there's a different business impact. So starting with business impact analysis assessments around AI is going to be another good way to get visibility into the risks. Um, Identity and access management programs, you used to have human users using IT assets. Now you have human users and non-human users using traditional IT assets and then AI assets. And now all of that in a fundamental level is going to have a data governance structure because AI is only as good as the data you're giving it access to. One of the big pictures when people think AI is we always hear, we gave it access to the internet and it's out there learning. Well, sure, in a very large model, that's great. But for healthcare specific use cases, we want to look at data governance structures where we're just giving an AI model access to a scientific research paper on cardiology, on cancer research, on patient record retention, right? And so that these smaller agentic AI deployments can have very narrow focuses and they're not getting convoluted data models, right? With things that are irrelevant to their tasks. And lastly, with that, we need to manage what's called MRLF, model reality verification loop. And so if we put in a bunch of data from cardiologist reports from a specific area in the country or in the world from a decade ago, the data of what that looks like today, because of what we eat, what we breathe, what we drink, our lifestyle changes can be different. And so if we only train these models on legacy data or small data sets of a specific type of patient, you're going to get drift from what the model was trained on to what reality is. So this model reality verification loop is a really interesting framework to be able to track the data that we're using versus the data that we need to be using on a real-time model.
Interesting. So being very use case explicit and specific, and then having more real-time data feeding those models. Jonathan, what would you add to that?
So Nick and I had an interesting conversation yesterday about some of our own experiences and, working with AI models. And my kind of use cases are typically more around cybersecurity of modeling vulnerabilities, risk with an organization, helping an organization understand where to focus their limited time and effort. And there are things that I can do with AI that would have taken me months before that I can knock out in minutes or hours. But I have had a number of cases where I've asked AI for a specific product or specific result, and what it gave me looked to be valid. But then when I started asking follow-up questions, it had totally made up that information. And luckily, like, I caught that, but really understanding um, the prompts, how to validate the data that you're being given, and then uh, when we start talking about using this for medical advice, and the fact that, yes, sometimes AI does hallucinate, or in one case, it kind of flat out admitted to me that it lied, that instead of doing the research, it said it used the data off the top of its head. And so the what is being purpose built for healthcare usually has been kind of well tested to kind of understand these biases and understand the shortcuts it may take with prompting. But using general AI like ChatGPT or Bard or something like that, sometimes it is just focused on using the least processing resources, and those are things that people need to kind of understand about these models.
Right. Being in healthcare, knowing, has the LLM that I am using been trained in a healthcare context?
Right.
Has it gone through the proper vetting and has the safeguards to support healthcare use cases, as opposed to just, let's pull up Chat GPT on my browser and ask it some healthcare questions.
Right.
So yeah, fascinating. Well,
And
great. Go
I'd
ahead.
like to just add something to that. The terms in the space that we're seeing is, three things. There's alignment, deceptive alignment, reward hacking, and explainability. So alignment is making sure that these models are aligned to provide value to humans, right? And so
Mhm.
that's what they're doing, and that's what the core developers of these LLMs are doing, making sure the alignment between what's best practices for humans is ingrained in these models. Now, there's something called deceptive alignment and reward hacking. They kind of go together. There was an article that just came out yesterday on ChatGPT link that said, if you're saying please and thank you to our model, you're costing it tens of millions of dollars, because every token, right, every piece of data that you add to it, and it's you saying thank you, it processes that, it says you're welcome, it processes that, it's costing them resources, electricity, right? And so reward hacking is when, to Jonathan's example, hey, take these 5 steps and do this research. Well, it's only going to take 2 steps, and it's going to tell you it took the appropriate amount of steps because it wants to use less resources. It's not being deceptive from a human perspective. It's just trying to maintain how many resources it takes to execute the request. So when you're looking at that, you need to make sure that we have explainability. How did it get to this thought process? What steps did it take? What research did it use? What sources did it leverage to validate the data it's giving you? So if you can use those 3 components and be aware of those, it's something important to put into your AI risk assessments.
Can you repeat those one more time, those 3 components?
So you have alignment, deceptive alignment due to reward hacking, and explainability.
Got it. Super helpful. Yeah, this has been such great information. I've actually learned a lot. I'm sure that those that are watching are also feverishly taking notes on the great value being offered. So for everyone who's listening and watching, if you're in a position in your organization where you are needing to come up with these governance frameworks, with these policies and procedures, or doing these risk assessments and things of that nature, I hope this was valuable. If you are wanting some extra guidance and support, wanting to have a conversation with either Jonathan or Nick or any number of the additional experts we have in this area, between Optimum and Templar Shield, then please reach out. Our team will go ahead and put the LinkedIn profiles in the chat here. But let's go ahead and jump into Q&A. I'm going to go over to our queue here. The first question we have from our audience is from Dar. With AI, does it give me the opportunity to opt out via my private security? Jonathan, is that one that you want to answer?
I don't know the kind of context of that. With the organization that maybe that is your healthcare provider, depending on the technologies that they're using. For example, if they are using AI for transcription, they should give you a form to fill out that would allow you to opt out of being recorded, and using AI in that use case. But there is no kind of database, if you will, where individual users can register to say, "Hey, opt me out of AI in general." Um, Nick, any other kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think companies are going to have to update their policies, their opt-out verbiage, et cetera, right? Because if the company's policy allows that to aspire, they can track it and people can opt out. That'd be great. I think that for when we're thinking about the use, it's really around data governance is the question. Can my
Mhm.
data be opted out, not myself, right? And so when you look at GDPR versus, you know, different types of privacy requirements, it's you should be able to opt out. Of corporations should create that environment for you, the right to be forgotten, the right to opt out of having your data used in training models. You know, there are controls in place to enable that. Now, whether companies have built those questionnaires, whether they've built those controls in place to do so is the different question.
Okay. Our next question is from Pablo. Is it possible to use ChatGPT in this case for HIPAA compliance standards or not?
You know, I can jump in there. I was talking to a chief AI officer at a healthcare company a few weeks back, and just so you guys know, there are like ChatGPT or OpenAI, I should say, the parent company does offer HIPAA compliant environments, right?
Mm.
So if different vendors can offer different types of engagements, right? Federal governments tend to get it, or agencies tend to get into FedRAMP high hosted environments, right? So it's really around asking the vendor what environments they have, and they do have HIPAA compliance environments. So
And I
short
imagine,
answer,
I'm
but
sorry, continue.
I was just saying that short answer is yes on that. The other ways, a lot of organizations are building their own LLMs, right? For agentic AI use cases that are small data sets, as I gave those examples. And there are a lot of organizations that you can buy NVIDIA AI LLM chip for $250 right now. So companies may be running their own LLMs, and in which case they can host that in their own HIPAA compliant environments.
Yeah. But
I was going to say, in addition to asking the vendor, I would imagine there's also a step to educate your users on, how to make sure they're accessing the right environment, right? That is HIPAA compliant or whatever it may be. Jonathan, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I was going to say this is evolving quickly, and like if you do a Google search on that, you'll find articles saying no, you cannot. The Chat GPT OpenAI is not HIPAA compliant, and you cannot use it in a HIPAA environment. But I think just in kind of recent months, for certain customers, they will sign a business associate agreement. But that is something that you would have to negotiate with your kind of OpenAI representative, and then need to understand, even with some of the vulnerability work that I do. I, I make sure that I de-identify any client information, but also that there's some flags in the instance that I'm using to make sure that the data set is only available to me, and that when I'm done with it, that data set is destroyed and not used for any kind of training purposes. So there's both the issue of uh, can you do it? Can you get the kind of business associate agreement? And then understanding with that particular technology, what are kind of the sets of rules and flags, and the particular privacy agreement that is in place, and what's going to happen with your data.
Great information. And these are really good questions too. We have one more from Dar. A state of governance and compliance is restricting more and more about the variations of the chatbot being used. How will AI be able to differentiate what is allowed within HIPAA and other healthcare compliances?
There's a couple parts of that question. I think that first and foremost, compliant AI governance, not compliance, but governance itself is intended to not be restrictive for innovation, right? A lot of people have this idea that governance will stifle innovation. And in this environment, with how Jonathan mentioned, everything's very fluid. The book I published Monday, it might be completely irrelevant in 6 to 12 months from now, right? As we find out more information, but it should not be restrictive to that. So as there are frameworks that are restrictive specifically to HIPAA, again, that really goes down to data governance. And as Jonathan was mentioning, controls. There are AI models out there that you can have that will assess data and delete that data, right? There are professional accounts just in some of these vendors out there where you can set the controls to delete data and ensure your data is not used in external data sets. And there's ways to do external testing for that. Upload data externally, go to other solutions, see if they can find that data, right? It's really around control mapping and control modeling to ensure the policies are being followed. But ideally, it should be supportive of innovation in a safe, ethical, and controlled environment as much as what's possible.
Yeah, and I'd like to say, just to clarify, that Nick and I are not anti AI in any ways. I think, in fact, we're both very pro AI, and there are things that, from a security perspective, that I can now do with AI that I could not do a year ago. And there it's going to be very important for cybersecurity teams to incorporate AI into the tool set that they are using. The attackers are already doing it. Things are going to move faster because of it. But it is all a matter of, like Nick said, proper risk management, proper data governance, building some expertise internally on AI. And if you don't have that kind of expertise internally, acquiring it. And it goes across the gamut of, understanding it from a legal perspective, a compliance perspective, understanding the technology itself and how it works and what the risks are. And we're all going through a very rapid learning curve with this. Nick has been kind of focused with this past year with writing this book, and he's well ahead of me with kind of his expertise on this. But like you said, this is changing at a lightning pace.
And if I could just add one thing there, there's some amazing things happening with AI, especially in healthcare. I was watching an interview a couple of days ago regarding Google DeepMind's team working with protein identification, right? And before it would take, I think it was $10 million in a year to really identify a structure of protein that can potentially be assessed for healthcare purposes. Now they can do it in weeks, sometimes days, right? And instead of $10 million, you're talking like a couple $1,000, maybe $10,000 in electricity, right, for the compute power. So there's some amazing things happening out there, and it's really exciting. There's no way to put the genie back in the bottle. Technology progress is unidirectional. We're going forward. The best thing we can do is, how can we identify how the decisions are made with AI? Are we identifying correct sources of data, any potential biases? Can we detect manipulation, reasoning errors? And can we build those legal and regulatory defenses to support the use cases that we're implementing AI for?
So I'm actually, that you mentioned about the cost and the electricity and things of that nature. This last question, let's try to wrap this up here in just 30 seconds or so. How can we measure the stochastic uncertainty in the cost utility function when applying AI technologies in healthcare?
Just a relevant data point I feel is a lot of nuclear power plants generate like one is gigawatt of power, right? And at a time. And a lot of these data centers are designed to consume 10 times as much data. And so if you really look at the amount of data centers being planned just for AI modeling, that will take up 100% of the power that we currently generate in this country, just in the United States alone. And so, and I'm sure other countries are dealing with this in their own model. So the idea is we need to double or triple electricity generation. There's small nuclear power plants being created. There's a lot more power plants being brought back online that were sunset. And so we have an energy problem when it comes to it. Full stop.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's a great ominous way to end our talk today. No, in all seriousness, Jonathan, Nick, thank you so much for just providing so much of your expertise. I know we've only scratched the surface. So again, for any of you that are listening, feel free to reach out and continue the conversation with us. We would love to talk to you and guide you and help you on your journey with AI risk and security and compliance. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next Healthy as Tech episode.